Kim Do-yeon had always been invisible. In the massive halls of Nexus Prime, the galaxy's largest trade station, thousands of beings walked past his small translation booth every day. None of them noticed him. That was exactly how he liked it. His booth sat in the corner of level 7, squeezed between a Martian coffee shop and a repair station for mining equipment. The walls were covered with old books and data tablets in dozens of languages. Most people used the automatic translation machines that hung from the ceiling like metal spiders. But some things were too old, too strange, or too broken for machines to understand. That was when they came to do Hyun. He was good at his job, very good. While other translators worked with the common galactic languages, Do-yeon specialized in the forgotten ones. Dead languages from worlds that no longer existed. Trading codes from merchant families that had been extinct for centuries. Ritual speeches from religious groups that had scattered across the stars. His friend Lee Minho often joked that Do-yeon could probably talk to ghosts if he tried hard enough. Minho worked in the booth next to his, handling modern diplomatic translations. He was loud and friendly, everything Do-yeon was not. Where Minho had clients lined up outside his door, Do-yeon might see 3 customers in a good week, but Do-yeon did not mind the quiet. It gave him time to study. Every night after the station's artificial sun dimmed to simulate evening, he would pull out his private collection of linguistic puzzles, ancient texts that had been found on dead worlds, symbol patterns that appeared in ruins across different galaxies, languages that seemed to follow rules that made no sense. The Galactic Council had strict rules about translation work. Certain languages were completely forbidden. They called them Class 0 languages. The official reason was that these languages contained dangerous information, military secrets from old wars, religious texts that could cause riots between species, technical manuals for weapons that could destroy planets. But Do-yeon had always suspected there was more to it. The Forbidden Language database was locked behind 7 different security systems. The penalty for even attempting to access it was immediate execution. That seemed like too much security for old military codes. Most translators followed the rules without question. Minho had told him once that curiosity was dangerous in their line of work. Better to translate what they were paid to translate and go home safe every night. Do-yeon had tried to follow that advice. For 3 years, he had done exactly what was asked of him, nothing more, nothing less. He translated trade agreements between asteroid miners and shipping companies. He decoded personal letters from soldiers to their families. He helped tourists understand local customs on planets they visited. It was honest work, safe work. Boring work? Everything changed on a Tuesday morning when the Vorthan merchant arrived. The Vorthans were an old species. One of the first to develop space travel. They looked like tall, thin humans with silver skin and 4 arms. This particular Vorthan was ancient even by his species standards. His name was something that translated roughly to Keeper of Old Things. He shuffled into Do-yeon's booth carrying a metal case that looked older than most civilizations. Inside the case were dozens of stone tablets covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The symbols seemed to shift and move when Do-yeon was not looking straight at them. "These are trade records," the old Vorthan said in his species musical language, "from the time before the council, before the rules. I need them translated for a historical archive." Do-yeon studied the tablets carefully. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen before. They were not carved into the stone. They seemed to grow from it, like living things made of light and shadow. Some of the symbols looked almost familiar, as if he had seen them in dreams. "This will take time," Do-yeon told the merchant. "The language is very old. I may need several weeks." The Vorthan nodded and paid in advance. More money than Do-yeon usually made in 6 months. As soon as the merchant left, Do-yeon sealed his booth and began to work. The first tablet was simple enough. Basic trade information, names of goods, quantities, prices. But as he worked deeper into the collection, the language began to change. The symbols became more complex. The grammar started, following patterns that made his head ache. By the 3rd day, Do-yeon realized he was not just translating a language. He was learning it. The symbols were teaching themselves to him. Every time he looked at them, he understood a little more. Not just what they meant, but how they worked. How they connected to each other. How they connected to something larger. Min. Notice the change first. "You look terrible," his friend said, bringing him a cup of coffee on the fourth morning. "When was the last time you slept?" Do-yeon looked up from the tablets. He had been working for 16 hours straight. "Cannot stop now. This language is incredible, Minho. It is like nothing I have ever seen." Minho glanced at the tablets and frowned. "Those symbols look strange. Are you sure this is legal?" The merchant said they were trade records. "Historical documents, Do-yeon." Minho's voice became serious. "Promise me you will be careful. If those tablets contain anything forbidden, you need to report them immediately. I do not want to see you get in trouble," Do-yeon promised, but he had no intention of stopping. The language was too fascinating, too important. He could feel that. He was on the edge of understanding something incredible. On the 7th night, working alone in his booth with only the soft glow of his reading lamp, Do-yeon finally cracked the pattern. The language was not just describing trade goods. It was describing reality itself. The symbols did not just represent things. They were connected to the things they represented. His hands shaking with excitement, Do-yeon spoke the first complete sentence he had translated. The words felt strange in his mouth. They tasted like starlight in deep space. As soon as he spoke them, the lights in his booth flickered. A neural translation implant, the small device behind his ear that helped him process alien languages, suddenly became very hot. Then he felt it. Something vast and ancient turning its attention toward him. Something that had been sleeping in the space between stars. Something that had been waiting for someone to speak its name. Do-yeon dropped the tablet. His hands were shaking. The sensation faded, but he knew it would be back. He had done something that could not be undone. He looked at the remaining tablets, still covered in their shifting symbols. There were dozens of them. Each one contained more of this impossible language. Each one was a doorway to something that the galaxy had spent centuries trying to keep locked away. Do-yeon turned off his lamp and sealed the tablets back in their case. Tomorrow he would decide what to do with them. Tonight he needed to think about what he had become. He was no longer just a translator. He was something else now. Something that the galaxy was not ready for. As he walked home through the quiet corridors of Nexus Prime, Do-yeon did not notice the small security drone that had been watching his booth. He did not see it transmit a priority alert to Galactic Council headquarters. But somewhere in the deep bureaucracy of galactic government, flags were being raised, systems were being activated, and people who specialized in making problems disappear were being given new assignments. The quiet translators. Life was about to become very loud indeed. Do-yeon did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw vast shapes moving through the darkness between stars, shapes that looked at him with eyes older than galaxies. When he finally gave up trying to rest, the station's artificial morning was already beginning. He arrived at his booth early, hoping to continue his work before Minho could ask difficult questions. But as soon as he activated his workstation, alerts began flashing across his screen. Power fluctuations had been detected in his section of Level 7. The station's main computer wanted to know. His equipment was malfunctioning. Do-yeon deleted the alerts and pulled out the stone tablets. In the morning light, they looked different. The symbols seemed brighter, more alive. When he touched the first tablet, it felt warm under his fingers. He spent the morning working on simpler translations, trying to ignore the tablets, but they called to him. Every few minutes his eyes would drift back to their strange symbols. He could feel them waiting, patient as mountains. Around midday, his friend Choi Hannah stopped by his booth. She worked in the station's cultural exchange department, helping new species learn galactic customs. Hannah was one of the few people who understood Do-yeon's love of old languages. "You look tired," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Minho said, "You have been working on something interesting." Do-yeon covered the tablets with a cloth. "It's just some old trade documents. Nothing special." Hannah raised an eyebrow. She had known him for 2 years and could tell when he was lying. "Do-yeon, you only get that excited about languages when you have found something incredible. What are you hiding?" Before he could answer, The lights in his booth flickered. Just for a moment, but Hannah noticed. She looked around the small room with concern. "Has your power been unstable lately?" sometimes Doyan admitted. "It started a few days ago. You should report it to maintenance. Electrical problems can be dangerous on a space station." After Hannah left, Doyan tried to focus on normal work, but the tablets would not let him ignore them. The symbols seemed to pulse with their own light. Finally, he gave up and pulled away the cloth. The moment he looked at them directly, the symbols began teaching him again. New patterns emerged, complex grammatical structures that hurt his brain to understand. And underneath it all, a growing sense that this language was not just describing reality. It was connected to it in ways that should have been impossible. Late in the afternoon, Station Commander Park Subin arrived with 2 security officers. Commander was a serious woman who had run Nexus Prime for 10 years. She was known for ICE being fair but strict. The fact that she was visiting his booth personally meant something was very wrong. "Kim Do-yeon," she said formally. "We need to discuss some unusual energy readings from your section." Do-yeon's heart began beating faster. Energy readings? Yesterday evening, at approximately 2200 hours, our sensors detected an unknown energy signature from this booth. The readings were unlike anything in our database. Can you explain what might have caused this? Do-yeon looked at the covered tablets. "I've been working with some old documents. Perhaps they contain trace minerals that affect your sensors." Commander Park studied his face carefully. "May I see these documents? They belong to a client. I'm not sure I can." "Show them without permission, Mr. Kim." "I am not asking for permission. I am ordering you to show me these documents." "The energy signature we detected was classified as potentially dangerous by our main computer. If you are working with hazardous materials, I need to know immediately."
Ice.
With for a sort of sap for with the fat the we with and the tablets lay on his desk, their symbols shifting gently in the artificial light. Commander Park leaned forward to examine them. As soon as she looked directly at the symbols, she stepped back quickly. "What language is this?" "I am not sure," Do-yeon lied. "Something very old, pre-galactic possibly?" One of the security officers moved closer to the tablets. "Commander, these symbols match patterns in the forbidden language database." The temperature in the booth seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Park's expression became very serious. "Kim, you are hereby ordered to cease all work on these materials immediately. The tablets will be confiscated pending investigation by Galactic Council authorities." "But my client paid me to translate them," Do-yeon protested. "Your client will be contacted and questioned. These tablets may contain Class 0 linguistic material. Working with such material without authorization is a capital offense." As the security officers moved to take the tablets, Do-yeon felt panic rising in his chest. The language was too important to lose, too incredible to waste. Without thinking, he spoke a single word in the ancient tongue. The word meant "stop" in the old language, but it was much more than that. It was a command to reality itself. The security officers froze in place like statues. Commander Park's eyes went wide with shock. The lights in the booth went out completely, then came back brighter than before. And somewhere in the deep structure of the station, alarms began to sound. "What did you just do?" Commander Park whispered. Do-yeon stared at the frozen security officers. He could see them breathing, could see their eyes moving, but they could not move their bodies. The single word he had spoken was still echoing in the air around them, even though he had stopped talking. "I do not know," he said. "Honestly." Commander Park activated her emergency communicator. "This is Park Soo-ben. We have a Code 7 situation on Level 7. I need a full containment team and immediate contact with Galactic Council security." The security officer suddenly unfroze and stumbled backward, gasping. One of them drew his weapon but seemed confused about what to aim at. "Everyone out," Commander Park ordered. "This booth is now under quarantine. Mr. Kim, you are confined to quarters pending arrival of council authorities." As they escorted Doyon from his booth, he saw Minho watching from his doorway. His friend's face was pale with worry. Behind him, other translators and shop owners were gathering to see what was happening. Doyon Minho called out, "What is going on?" "I found something I should not have found," Doyon replied as the security officers led him away. That evening, alone in his small apartment, Doyon sat by his window looking out at the stars. He could feel something moving out there in the darkness. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. His words in the ancient language had been like shouting into a vast cave, and now something was shouting back. His door chimed. He opened it to find his friend Nam Tai-ho, who worked in the station's engineering department. Tai-ho was a quiet man who usually kept to himself. "Can I come in?" Tai-ho asked, looking nervously down the corridor. Doyon led him inside. Tai-ho immediately went to the window and closed the privacy screens. "I heard what happened today," Tai-ho said quietly. "The whole station is talking about it. They say you spoke a word that froze to security officers. It was an accident. Doyon, I need to tell you something. I've been monitoring the stations. Deep space sensors. 3 hours ago, we detected movement in the outer system, something big, something that was not there yesterday." Doyon felt his blood turn cold. "What kind of movement?" "The computer cannot identify it. Whatever it is larger than a moon, but it moves like it is alive, and it is heading toward us." Through the privacy screens, they could not see the stars. But both men could feel something watching them from the darkness, something that had heard Doyon speak its language and was coming to find him. "What have I done?" Doyon whispered. Tai-ho put a hand on his shoulder. "I do not know, but I think we are about to find out." In the depths of space, ancient minds were stirring. Minds that remembered when the galaxy was young and full of possibility. Minds that had been waiting eons for someone to speak the words that would wake them from their long sleep. The quiet translator had become something much more dangerous, and the galaxy was about to learn why some languages were forbidden. The next morning brought chaos to Nexus Prime. Galactic enforcement ships surrounded the station like metal vultures. Their commander, Agent Kong Juan, arrived with 50 armed soldiers and orders to contain what they called a linguistic contamination event. Doyon watched from his apartment window as soldiers in black armor marched through the station corridors. They were setting up containment fields and scanning equipment. Anyone who had been near Level 7 was being questioned and tested. Tai-ho had smuggled him a communication device before the lockdown began. Through it, Doyon could hear fragments of what was happening. Minho had been arrested for questioning. Hannah was being held in protective custody. Commander Park was arguing with the enforcement agents about jurisdiction. But what worried Doyon most was what Tai-ho had discovered through his engineering access. The thing moving through space toward them was not one object. It was dozens of them. Massive shapes that moved with purpose through the star system. And they were all converging on Nexus Prime. "They will be here in less than 2 days," Tai-ho whispered through the communicator. "Whatever you woke up, it is coming." Doyon spent the day studying the language patterns he had memorized from the tablets. Without the physical stones, he had to rely on what he had learned. But the more he understood, the more terrifying it became. This was not just an ancient language. It was the language of creation itself. Every word was connected to the fundamental forces that held reality together. When he spoke it, he was not just communicating. He was giving commands to the universe. The symbols in his memory showed him the truth. Long ago, before any of the current galactic civilizations existed, there had been others. The first ones, they had spoken reality into the shapes they wanted. They had created stars and planets with their words. They had guided the development of life itself. But something had gone wrong. The power was too great. Their words began to reshape things in ways they had not intended. So they had made a choice. They went silent. They stopped speaking their language and retreated to the spaces between stars, waiting and watching as the universe developed without their direct influence. The modern galactic civilizations had found traces of their language over the centuries. Each time, disaster had followed. Planets had been destroyed. Entire species had vanished. The Galactic Council had learned to recognize the patterns and forbid any contact with the ancient words, but now Do-Yan had broken that silence. His words had reached across the void and told the first ones that someone new could speak their language. They were coming to investigate. That evening, Agent Kang Gi-won came to his apartment. She was a tall woman with cybernetic implants covering half her face. Her artificial eye glowed red in the dim light. She carried weapons that could kill most known species with a single shot. Kim Do-Yan, she said, settling into the chair across from him. You have caused considerable trouble. I was just translating some old documents. Those documents contained fragments of the Creator's tongue, a language that has been classified as extinct for good reason. Every time someone speaks it, people die. Agent Kang activated a holographic display showing images of destroyed worlds, planets cracked in half, space stations torn apart by unknown forces, entire civilizations reduced to dust. This is what happens when the first ones notice us, she continued. They do not mean to cause harm, but their attention is too much for normal matter to handle. Just by looking at us, they can unmake us. Do-Yan studied the images with growing horror. I did not know. Of course you did not know. Not the information is classified beyond your clearance level, but now you have spoken their language. You have called them back and they are coming. Can we stop them? Agent Kang laughed bitterly. Stop beings that predate our entire galactic civilization. Stop creatures that can reshape reality with their thoughts. No, Mr. Kim, we cannot stop them.
So nice.
But we can try to minimize the damage. She leaned forward, her cybernetic eye focusing on his face. I need you to tell me exactly what you said to them. Every word, every symbol. If we understand what message you sent, we might be able to predict what they will do when they arrive. Do-Yan closed his eyes and recalled the words he had spoken. But as he began to repeat them, something strange happened. The language would not let him speak it casually. The words felt heavy in his mouth, full of power that wanted to be released. I cannot just say the words, he told Agent Kang. Language is too strong. If I speak it again, something will happen. Then write it down. Draw the symbols. Do-Yan tried, but his hands would not obey. Every time he attempted to write one of the ancient symbols, his fingers froze. The language was protecting itself from being copied carelessly. Agent Kang's expression became very serious. Mr. Kim, are you telling me that you cannot control this language anymore? Before Do-Yan could answer, the lights in his apartment went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Through the walls, they could hear alarms beginning to wail. Tai-Ho's voice crackled through the hidden communicator. Do-Yan, you need to see this. Get to an observation deck if you can. They have arrived. Agent Kang drew her weapon and activated her emergency beacon. All units. This is Kanjuan. The entities have reached the station. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. They moved to the apartment's small window. Outside, Nexus Prime was surrounded by shapes that hurt to look at directly. They were not ships or creatures in any sense that made sense. They were spaces where reality worked differently. Gaps in the universe where the normal laws of physics had been replaced by something older and stranger. As Do-Yan watched, one of the shapes moved closer to the station. Where it touched the outer hull, the metal began to change. It became something that was still metal, but also something else. Something that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. They are not here to destroy us, Do-Yan said suddenly. The knowledge came to him from the language itself, flooding his mind with understanding. They are here to communicate. Agent Kong turned to stare at him. What did you just say? They have been alone for millions of years? They stopped speaking, because their words were too powerful. But they had been waiting for someone who could learn their language safely, someone who could be a bridge between them and the rest of the galaxy. That is impossible. No biological mind can handle direct communication with the first ones. But even as she spoke, Doyan could feel them trying to reach him. Ancient minds pressing against his consciousness, patient and careful. They were not trying to force their way in. They were asking permission, asking if he was ready to become something more than human. The station shook as one of the entities moved even closer. Through the walls, Doyun could hear people screaming. But he also heard something else. A voice like starlight in deep space, speaking directly into his mind. The little speaker had said in the creator's tongue. Are you ready to learn why we went silent? You ready to understand what we have been waiting for? Doyan looked at Agent Kong, who was speaking frantically into her communicator. He looked out at the impossible shapes surrounding the station. He thought of his quiet life as a translator, and how that life was gone forever. Then he answered, in the only language that mattered. Yes, he said. I am ready. The universe held its breath as the first ones began to teach him the true meaning of the words he had been speaking. The teaching began gently, like water flowing into a dry riverbed. The first ones showed Doyan memories that were older than stars. He saw the universe when it was young and empty, filled only with potential. He watched as the ancient beings spoke the first words that gave shape to chaos. They had been explorers once, like the species that filled the galaxy now. But they had discovered something that changed everything. Language was not just a tool. For communication, it was the foundation of reality itself. Everything that existed was because someone had spoken it into being. At first, they had used this power carefully. They created beautiful worlds and guided the first sparks of life. But power like that was hard to control. Their casual conversations began reshaping solar systems. Their arguments started and ended ice ages. Poetry gave birth to new forms of matter that should not have existed. The breaking point came when they realized they could not turn off their influence. Even their silence was a form of speech to the universe. Their very presence was rewriting the laws of physics around them. So they made the hardest choice any species had ever made. They withdrew from physical reality, became observers instead of participants. They watched as new civilizations rose and fell, never interfering, never speaking. 8. Never letting their words reshape what others had built. But they had been so terribly lonely. As the knowledge flowed into his mind, Doyan felt his human consciousness stretching to contain it. He was still himself, but he was also becoming something larger. The boundaries between his thoughts and the ancient minds around him were starting to blur. Agent Kong was shaking him, shouting words he could barely hear. Her cybernetic implants were sparking as the reality distortions around him interfered with her technology. Kim Doyon.
Ow.
You need to fight this. Do not let them take control of your mind. But Doyon was not being controlled. He was being offered a choice. The first ones were showing him what he could become, a bridge between their ancient wisdom and the young civilizations of the galaxy. A translator who could speak for beings too, powerful to speak for themselves. The price was everything he had been before, through the station's communication system. He could hear the chaos spreading. Galactic fleets were converging on Nexus Prime. From across the local systems, the Galactic Council had declared humanity a threat to universal stability. His friends were being hunted as possible carriers of linguistic contamination. They are going to destroy the station, Agent Kong said, her voice tight with pain as her implants continued to malfunction. The Council has authorized the use of planet-killer weapons. They would rather eliminate everyone here than risk the infection spreading. Doyon felt a surge of anger. These people were innocent. Minho, Hana, Tai-Ho, even Commander Park. They had done nothing wrong. They were being condemned because he had been curious about an old language. His anger touched the first ones. They responded with something like surprise. They had forgotten that younger species could feel such strong emotions about individual lives. Two beings who had existed for millions of years. The death of a few thousand people seemed like a small thing, but it was not small to Dogen. And through their connection, he made them understand that. "Stop the fleets," he said aloud, his words carrying the weight of the Creator's tongue. Reality rippled outward from Nexus Prime. Across the star system, warships found their weapons systems shutting down. Navigation computers reported impossible readings. Faster than light drives refused to engage. Agent Kong stared at him with her remaining human eye. "What did you just do?" "I saved them," Doyen replied. But he could feel the cost of the command. Speaking with such authority had pushed him further away from his human self. He could still remember being Kim Doyen, but that person felt distant. Now, like someone he had known long ago, the first ones were pleased with his choice. They had been right to wait for someone who cared about protecting life rather than controlling it. But they also showed him the consequences of what he had done by stopping the fleets. He had revealed the full extent of his power to the galaxy. Every government, every military, every species would now know that humanity had produced someone who could speak reality into new shapes. They would never feel safe again. Some would try to worship him. Others would try to destroy him. Most would simply be afraid. "There is another way," the ancient voices whispered in his mind. "Accept our gift completely. Become our voice in this galaxy. Help us guide the younger species without overwhelming them." Doyon looked around his apartment. Gen Kong was struggling to stay conscious as her cybernetic systems failed. Through the window, he could see the impossible shapes of the first ones pressing closer to the station. Reality was becoming unstable just from their presence. In the distance, he could sense the terror of everyone on Nexus Prime. They could feel something vast and incomprehensible watching them. His friend Tai-Ho was trying to keep the stations. Systems running as physics itself became unreliable. Minho and Hannah were in detention cells, wondering if they would ever see home again. "If I accept," Dion asked the ancient minds, "what happens to them? What happens to my friends? They will be safe. We will protect them as we protect you. But you must understand, little speaker, no. Once you become our voice, you can never go back to being only human. You will be something new. Something that bridges the gap between mortal and eternal." Doyen thought about his quiet life as a translator. A small booth filled with old books. His simple apartment with its view of the stars. All of that would be gone forever. But he also thought about the alternative. The galaxy would tear itself apart trying to deal with the return of the first ones. Billions would die in the panic. Entire civilizations would collapse. Unless someone stood between them. Unless someone could translate the needs of ancient gods into words that mortals could understand. "Will I still be me?" he asked. "You will be more than you," they replied. "But the core of who you are will remain. Your compassion, your curiosity, your desire to help others communicate. These things will not change." Agent Kung managed to grab his arm. "Do not do it," she whispered. "Do not let them change you. Find another way." But Doyon could feel the weight of the galaxy's fear pressing down on him. Every moment he delayed, more ships were being sent to destroy Nexus Prime. More innocent people were being marked for death because of his discovery. He had been a translator his entire adult life. Now the universe needed him to perform the most important translation in galactic history. "I accept," he said in the Creator's tongue. The transformation began immediately. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his human brain. He could suddenly perceive the quantum foundations of reality, the mathematical structures that held matter together, the linguistic patterns that governed the behavior of stars. But at the center of it all, he was still Doyen. Still the quiet man who loved old languages and cared about his friends. The first ones welcomed him with something like joy. The first time in eons, they had someone who could speak for them without being consumed by their power and across the galaxy, every government received the same message, transmitted simultaneously in 1,000 different languages. "Do not be afraid. We have found our voice." The message that went out across the galaxy was simple, but it changed everything. In every language, on every world, People heard the same words spoken by a voice that sounded like their own species, but carried the weight of eternity. I am Kim Doyen, of humanity. I speak for the first ones. We do not come to conquer or destroy. We come to guide and protect. The age of silence is ending, but the age of fear does not need to begin. On Nexus Prime, reality slowly stabilized. As the first ones learned to control their presence through Doyen's human perspective, the impossible shapes around the station became less painful to look at. The distortions in space-time smoothed out enough for normal technology to function again. Agent. Kong's cybernetic implants stopped sparking. She stared at Doyen, who still looked mostly human, but whose eyes now held depths that seemed to contain. Star Systems. What have you become? She asked. I am still a translator, Doyen replied, and his voice carried harmonics that made the walls of the apartment resonate like musical instruments. I just have a much larger vocabulary now. Through his expanded awareness, he could sense the fear and confusion spreading across the galaxy. Military commanders were trying to understand how their weapons had been disabled. Politicians were arguing about how to respond to a threat they could not comprehend. Scientists were struggling to explain how someone could broadcast the same message to billions of worlds simultaneously. But Doyen also sensed something else. Curiosity, wonder, relief. For centuries, the galaxy had lived under the shadow of the forbidden languages. Everyone knew there were things too dangerous to speak about, powers too great to be understood. Now someone was offering to explain those mysteries. His friend Taiho was the first to visit him after the transformation. Doyen, he said quietly, standing in the doorway of the apartment, are you still you? I am still your friend, Doyen replied. But I am also something more now. I can perceive things that I could not before. I understand connections that were invisible to me as a human. Taiho stepped into the room carefully. Can you still feel human emotions more clearly than ever? The first ones had forgotten what it was like to care about individual lives. Through me, they are remembering. They are learning to see the universe through mortal eyes again. Over. The following days, Doyen began his work as a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern civilization. The first ones had knowledge that could solve problems the galaxy had struggled with for millennia. Technologies that could heal damaged worlds. Methods of faster-than-light travel that did not require destroying entire stars for fuel. Agricultural techniques that could feed billions without harming ecosystems. But they also had to learn restraint. Their casual suggestions could reshape entire civilizations overnight. Through Doyen, they discovered the importance of letting species develop at their own pace. Minho and Hannah were released from detention and came to see their transformed friend. They found him in his old translation booth, which had been expanded into a communication center, where he could speak with representatives from across the galaxy. You could have any job in the universe now, Minho said, looking around at the advanced equipment. You could rule planets if you wanted to. The job I always wanted, Doyen replied with a smile that was both human and something more. I help people understand each other. Commander Park arrived with formal orders from the Galactic Council. The restrictions on Nexus Prime had been lifted. The station was being designated as the official communication point between the first ones and galactic civilization. Doyen would be humanity's first official ambassador to cosmic entities. The Council wants to know what the first ones plan to do, she said. They plan to watch, to guide when asked, to protect when necessary. They have learned from their mistakes. They will not impose their will on the galaxy. And what about you? What do you plan to do? Doyen looked out through the reinforced windows of his booth. He could see representatives from dozens of species waiting for appointments to speak with him. Diplomats who needed help understanding cosmic law, scientists who wanted to learn about the fundamental nature of reality, ordinary people who were simply afraid and needed reassurance. I plan to translate, he said. The first ones speak in concepts that are too large for most minds to grasp. I will help them find smaller words, words that mortals can understand, without being overwhelmed. Agent Kung had recovered from her injuries and been assigned as his official security liaison. She found him one evening working late, reviewing a translation of cosmic engineering principles that could help repair a damaged solar system. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Giving up your humanity? I did not give it up, Doyan replied. I expanded it. I am still the person who loved old languages and quiet evenings. But now I can understand languages that predate matter itself. I can have conversations with beings who remember the birth of time, but you can never go back to being just Kim Do-yan, the translator. No, he admitted. But Kim Do-yan, the translator, was always meant to become something more. I just did not know it until I found the right words. As months passed, the galaxy began to adapt to its new reality. The first ones, speaking through Do-yan, helped resolve conflicts that had lasted for centuries. They shared knowledge that advanced medicine, agriculture, and space travel by thousands of years, but they were careful never to solve problems completely. They provided guidance and tools, but left the actual work to the species who would benefit from it. They had learned that growth required struggle, and that wisdom could not be simply given, had to be earned. Do-yan's human friends remained, his anchors to mortal concerns. Taiho helped him understand when the first one's suggestions were too overwhelming for normal people to handle. Minho kept him informed about how ordinary citizens were reacting to the changes. Hannah made sure he remembered to eat regular food and take breaks from his cosmic duties. Even Agent Kong became something like a friend, helping him navigate the political complexities of representing beings who thought in geological time to governments that planned in election cycles. Years passed. Do-yan aged more slowly now, his human lifespan extended by his connection to eternal minds, but his essential nature remained unchanged. He was still the quiet man who had once sat in a small booth, helping people understand each other. The galaxy had entered a new age, an age where the impossible was possible, where ancient wisdom guided modern progress. The loneliness of cosmic entities had been healed by the compassion of a single human being, and at the center of it all was a translator who had learned that the most powerful language in the universe was not the creator's tongue that could reshape reality. It was the simple human ability to care about others, to build bridges instead of walls, to find words that brought beings together instead of driving them apart. Kim Do-yan had become the God Speaker. But more importantly, he had remained human enough to remember why that mattered. The first ones had finally found their voice. Through him, they had remembered what it meant to belong to a community that stretched across the stars. In the end, the greatest translation was not converting ancient words into modern languages. It was helping eternal beings remember what it felt like to have friends.